Dreams and Imagination in Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander. Anything can happen. Everything is possible and probable. Time and space do not exist. On a flimsy framework of reality, the imagination spins, weaving new patterns. In this episode, we're going to do something a little different. We've mentioned before that films, TV shows, and video games are all on the table for this channel. And for this episode, we've chosen a film that functions like a work of literature. Join us today as we examine the mind-bending intersection of dreams and reality in Ingmar Bergman's film Fanny and Alexander. I'm your host, Bob. Now please, sit back and enjoy today's edition of Lit Tips. The films of Swedish director Ingmar Bergman, replete with their recurring themes of question faith, death, and psychology, are often stereotyped as purveying a particularly Scandinavian brand of bleakness and melancholy. Deeper examination, however, reveals these films to be far more than the bottomless wells of hopelessness Bergman's detractors make them out to be. 1982's Fanny and Alexander, a semi-autobiographical Bildungsroman intended to be the director's last film, stands as the ultimate summation of all of Bergman's favorite themes and obsessions. Christmas time, 1907, Uppsala, Sweden. The wealthy Ekdahl family has gathered together at the family matriarch's home to celebrate the holidays. The cast is sprawling, featuring not just the Ekdahls themselves, but also the hired help running about non-stop to keep the celebration going smoothly. The primary perspective through which we see the evening unfold belongs to the titular boy Alexander. Given to flights of imagination that blur the line between fantasy and reality, Alexander is unconcerned with the inane adult dramas of which we see glimpses in this early sequence. He and his younger sister Fanny live happy, content lives with their mother, Emily, and their father, Oscar, the head of a local theater company. A sense of unreality permeates Fanny and Alexander from the very first scene. Alexander wanders through the large recreational room of his grandmother, Helena's house, carefully observing the objects that fill the room. Among the objects is a statue of a woman that moves on its own and stares back at Alexander. Less than 2 minutes into the film, the viewer is told to expect the unexpected. After the annual staging of a nativity play in the following party, Oscar suddenly dies of a stroke, throwing the family into limbo. The tight-knit Ekdahls help the grieving widow and children as best they can, but they are unable, despite their reservations, to convince Emily not to remarry the widowed town bishop, Edvard. Alexander, along with his mother and sister, move into the bishop's home, and it becomes immediately clear that his new stepfather is Oscar's opposite in every way. Dogmatic, strict, and showing no patience for Alexander's youthful, rebellious nature, the bishop and Alexander find themselves in a war of attrition in which neither side shows any sign of budging to the demands and sensibilities of the other. The bishop's increasingly authoritarian control of his new family leads to acts of physical abuse and punishment towards Alexander, whose hatred and contempt for the man only escalates. Alexander grows to hate everything the bishop stands for, including his religion. Like so many Bergman protagonists before him, Alexander finds himself questioning the existence of a god who, as he sees it, either never existed or at least might as well not have, given that he seems to have turned his back on him when he needs him most. Take this exchange between Alexander and Ekdahl family friend Isak. Everything is alive, and everything is God, or God's intention. Not only the good things, but the cruelest and worst. What do you think? If there is a god, he's a shit and piss god, who I'd like to kick in the ass. Bergman very rarely told his stories from the perspective of a child. It is this youthful perspective, though, which makes it easier for us to accept the numerous strange incidents which occur. Bergman depicts Alexander as having a very active imagination. Take, for example, the scene when Isaac tells a story about a young man making a pilgrimage through a foreign land. Alexander imagines himself as the protagonist of the story, and members of his family as the supporting characters. These images from his imagination during Isaac's tale last for only a brief time, but they bring a new perspective to the other examples of dream imagery Bergman presents. It leads us in the audience to ask ourselves, did the statue from the first scene really move on its own, or was it all in Alexander's mind? It should be noted that Oscar passes away while the theater company is rehearsing for a performance of Hamlet, begging further question as to the influence this particular play may have had on Alexander's mindset in his time of grief afterward. In contrast to these earlier events that are potentially explainable as results of Alexander's overactive imagination, there are sequences where the effects are profoundly felt by the rest of the world and not just Alexander. The most significant of these occurs in the film's final act. Fanny and Alexander's uncles have arranged for the children to be taken to Isaac's home to escape the cruelty of the bishop. The manner in which they are taken to the home is odd in and of itself. They are transported in a large trunk which the bishop is led to believe is of no importance. Things get decidedly more bizarre upon their arrival to Isaac's home. Part of the residence is filled with an assortment of strange antiques. Alexander is fascinated by these items much in the same way as he was enamored with his grandmother's home in the beginning of the film. He wanders through the house and comes across Isaac's nephew Ismail, who, for no discernible reason, is played by a woman. Ismail apparently has the ability to read Alexander's mind and see his deepest desires. As it turns out, his one wish is for the bishop to die so that his family will be free of him. Ismail appears to grant this wish by setting fire to the bishop's home using either magic or psychic powers. The bishop is revealed to have died shortly after Alexander's encounter with Ismail. Alexander's wish has come true and the Ekdahl family has been reunited. Despite the dozens of critical takes on many of Bergman's films over the years, surprisingly little has been written concerning Fanny and Alexander. One of the few critiques is Rick Moody's Fanny and Alexander, Bergman's Bildungsroman, written for the Criterion Collection release of the film. Moody proposes several theories which explain Alexander's story. One that particularly sticks out is one that goes so far as to suggest that the large majority of the film is entirely dreamt by Alexander, after he falls asleep in the opening sequence. This analysis comes off as far too simple and would be a cop-out for a film of such scale as this. Throughout his entire career, Bergman incorporated dreams into his films in a variety of ways. The daydreams and flashbacks of the old man in Wild Strawberries, the psychotic episodes of The Girl in Through a Glass Darkly, and the nightmare sequence in Hour of the Wolf are all examples of different presentations and approaches to dream imagery. In each of these films, dreams worked as a way of serving the plot and were not introduced arbitrarily. The daydreams in Wild Strawberries reveal information about the old man's past, while those in Through a Glass Darkly and Hour of the Wolf illustrate their protagonist's slow descent into madness. Moody's theory implies that nearly all of Fanny and Alexander is potentially a dream. It is difficult to accept this being the case in a film from a director who spent decades examining how events seen in dreams carry over into real life and vice versa. What separates Fanny and Alexander from these earlier films is the real-world impact felt by the dream imagery. In opposition to the previous film's protagonist, Alexander is considerably younger. Bergman may be implying that children have an innate ability to move between the dreaming and waking worlds whether they are consciously aware of it or not. By contrast, adults are only able to perceive one realm at a time, and are then forced to address questions presented in dreams while awake. Moody does include one telling quote from the movie in his essay. The bishop at one point says to Alexander, "Imagination is something splendid, a mighty force, a gift from God. It is held in trust for us by the great artists, writers, and musicians." Even though this is said by the villain of the film, it still has a lot to say about Bergman's approach. In an interview included on the DVD for Bergman's documentary, The Making of Fanny and Alexander, Bergman speaks about how all of his films are connected to his dreams in some manner. He additionally talks about how it was a new experience for him to work with child actors for an extended period of time. For a man whose work is often labeled as bleak and depressing, Bergman comes off as incredibly affable and lighthearted in the interview. Perhaps Fanny and Alexander was his way of showing this side of himself to his audience. He states that much of the film is semi-autobiographical, particularly the bishop being partially based on his own strict, domineering father who was himself employed as a Lutheran minister. With this in mind, the autobiographical nature of the film becomes all the more apparent. Despite his propensity for wrestling with some of the most unsettling aspects of adult life, Fanny and Alexander serves as a reminder that somewhere in the same mind that presented us with films dealing with mental breakdowns, faithless crusaders, and brutal divorces, there still existed a young kid with an unusual proclivity toward accepting the unexplainable. Film as dream. Film as music. No art passes our conscience the way film does, and goes directly to our feelings, deep down into the dark rooms of our souls. I am living permanently in my dream, from which I make brief forays into reality. We hope that you enjoyed this edition of Lit Tips. As always, hit that like button if you like what we're doing, subscribe for more videos on literature from your favorites to the plain obscure, hit that bell if you want to be notified when videos drop, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this video, along with suggestions for any books or authors you would like us to cover in future episodes. Until next time, keep reading.